The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of blood orange and bruised purple. Daniel, a seasoned hiker, relished the solitude of the familiar trail. He often wandered these woods, seeking solace in their embrace. But tonight, a strange unease settled upon him. The air, usually crisp and fresh, felt heavy, thick with an unseen tension. He shook off the feeling, attributing it to the encroaching darkness. The path, etched deep into the earth by years of footfall, should have been easy to follow. Yet each turn seemed unfamiliar, leading him deeper into the wood's shadowy heart. Doubt gnawed at him. Had he taken a wrong turn? Panic swelled in his chest, a cold fist squeezing his lungs. He quickened his pace, his boots crunching on the dry leaves scattered across the path. The last sliver of sunlight vanished, swallowed by the dense canopy overhead. Darkness descended, swift and absolute, wrapping around him like a suffocating blanket. He was lost, truly lost. The forest, once a source of comfort, now pressed in on him, a menacing entity. The rustling leaves whispered unintelligible warnings, carried on the wind that moaned through the trees. He strained his ears, trying to discern familiar sounds, but there was only an unsettling silence punctuated by the frantic thumping of his own heart. Fear, sharp and cold, cut through him. He pulled out his phone, its screen a beacon of false hope in the oppressive darkness. No signal. Of course not. He cursed his arrogance, his overconfidence in venturing out so late without telling anyone. He stumbled onward, driven by a desperate hope of finding his way back to the familiar path. The trees, gnarled and ancient, seemed to reach out with skeletal branches, their silhouettes twisting into grotesque shapes in the darkness. He flinched at every rustle, every snapping twig, his mind conjuring unseen horrors lurking just beyond his vision. Then, through the trees, a faint light flickered, a glimmer of hope in the suffocating darkness. He surged forward, hope lending strength to his weary legs. As he drew closer, the light resolved itself into a warm, inviting glow. Relief washed over him, momentarily eclipsing the fear. He broke into a run, but as he entered the clearing, a thick fog rolled in, swirling around his ankles. It was unnatural, clinging to the ground with an eerie luminescence. The air grew colder, heavy with the scent of damp earth and something ancient. He hesitated, a prickle of unease crawling up his spine. He ignored the voice of reason drawn towards the light like a moth to a flame. The fog parted slightly, revealing the source of the light. A crumbling stone structure, its silhouette stark against the swirling mist. It was a ruin, swallowed by the woods, its walls overgrown with ivy and its windows like vacant eyes staring out into the night. The warm light spilled from a single opening, beckoning him closer. He approached cautiously, his hand hovering over the rusted iron gate that hung precariously from its hinges. The air grew colder still, sending a shiver down his spine. He could feel it now, a presence, watching him from within the ruined walls. He pushed open the gate, its hinges groaning in protest, and stepped inside. The fog clung to him, seeping into his clothes, chilling him to the bone. He shivered, pulling his jacket tighter around himself. The light, emanating from a fireplace at the far end of the room, flickered, casting dancing shadows on the crumbling walls. He was not alone. He could feel it now, a palpable presence watching him from the shadows. He turned slowly, his heart pounding against his ribs like a drum, his breath caught in his throat. There, in the flickering light of the fireplace, stood a figure. It was neither man nor beast, yet it possessed qualities of both. Its eyes, burning like hot coals, pierced through the gloom, pinning him in their unwavering gaze. They held an ancient intelligence, a depth of knowledge that chilled him to the core. He tried to speak, to scream, but no sound escaped his lips. He was paralyzed, frozen in place by a fear so profound it transcended physical sensation. The figure took a step towards him, its form shifting, wavering in the flickering light. It was neither solid nor ethereal, but something in between, a being woven from shadow and moonlight. He closed his eyes, unable to bear the sight of it any longer. Every instinct screamed at him to flee, to run until his lungs burned and his legs gave way. But he was rooted to the spot, his body refusing to obey the commands of his terrified mind. The air grew thick, heavy with a cloying sweetness that made him gag. It smelled of decay, of death, of something ancient and unholy. He opened his eyes just a sliver and saw the figure standing before him, its form solidifying, taking on a more defined shape. It was humanoid, vaguely feminine, but its skin was ashen gray, stretched taut over bones that protruded at unnatural angles. Its fingers, tipped with long, sharp claws, twitched as if anticipating a feast. He screamed then, a primal sound of terror that echoed through the ruined structure. He stumbled back, tripping over a loose stone, and fell to the ground, his back against the cold, damp stone floor. The figure glided towards him, its movements fluid, almost serpentine. Adrenaline, raw and potent, surged through him. He scrambled back, scrambling on his hands and knees, desperate to put distance between himself and the creature that advanced upon him with an eerie grace. He crashed into a wall, his frantic scrabbling echoing in the silence. There was nowhere left to run. The figure loomed over him, its burning eyes boring into his soul. He squeezed his eyes shut, bracing himself for the inevitable. But the touch he expected, the searing pain, never came. He opened his eyes a sliver. The figure was gone, vanished. He was alone. He didn't waste a second. He scrambled to his feet, his heart pounding a frantic tattoo against his ribs. He didn't look back, didn't dare to see if the creature was still there, lurking in the shadows. He ran, blindly, recklessly through the fog-choked ruins, desperate to escape the nightmare that had ensnared him. He burst out of the ruins and into the suffocating embrace of the fog. He didn't slow down, didn't dare to. He ran until the trees were a blur, until his lungs burned and his legs screamed for respite. The fog clung to him, a tangible manifestation of his terror. He pushed through it, driven by a primal need to escape the darkness that had swallowed him whole. He didn't know how long he ran, how far he had strayed from the ruined structure that held his terror. Time lost all meaning, measured only by the frantic beating of his heart and the rasp of his breath. Then, through the swirling mist, he saw it. A faint light, flickering in the distance, a beacon of hope in the sea of darkness. He stumbled towards it, his legs heavy, his body on the verge of collapse. As he drew closer, the light resolved itself into the familiar glow of his car's headlights. Relief, so profound it brought tears to his eyes, washed over him. He collapsed against the side of his car, his body racked with tremors, his mind replaying the horrors he had witnessed. He fumbled for his keys, his hands shaking so violently he could barely hold them. He threw himself into the driver's seat, slammed the door shut, and engaged the locks. He sat there for a long moment, his chest heaving, his eyes darting around the familiar woods, now cloaked in the shadows of night. He started the engine, the familiar roar a sound of blessed normalcy. He put the car in gear and pulled away from the spot, leaving behind the fog-shrouded ruins and the horrors they held. He didn't look back. He drove through the night, the darkness outside a pale imitation of the abyss he had stared into. He didn't stop until he reached the familiar lights of the town, a beacon of civilization. He returned to his life, but something had changed. The darkness had seeped into him, leaving an indelible mark on his soul. He couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, eyes still upon him. He had escaped the darkness, but it lingered, a constant shadow. He was safe, for now,